had a trying week, kind of a more difficult week. A few more hands there for that one. We also had a trying week this week, and those times come and go. Decisions had to be made. We were stressed out and got sick too, and it's been kind of a rough week, unfortunately. And we all go through those times, right? We all go through those times where it's kind of difficult to just continue on, to continue being faithful and everything else. And if you're curious, you can ask me about some of those decisions later on. But I want to tell you, today could be one of the most helpful messages you ever hear, or it can be one of the most disappointing. It all depends on how you hear it. It depends on what you're going through today. Today I want to ask the question, why do people suffer? Right? Why is there suffering in the world? This is a big, big question for a lot of people. Why am I still suffering? Right? I'm a Christian. I've got Christ. Why am I still suffering? We've all suffered at some point in one form or another, but the question is why? Why does this happen? And so we want to talk today a little bit about why we suffer. But before we start, let's pray. Almighty Father, we thank you for today and this time again. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the comfort that it brings to us. The very message that you gave us, Father, thank you for it. And we thank you for the times of suffering. We thank you for the times of joy. We thank you for all of it because it's all from you. Father, guide this discussion today. Let it open our hearts and our minds, and let it challenge us in everyday life. Let it encourage us to trust you more, to ultimately draw closer to you. Father, thank you so much for this message and for this time. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. So one of the biggest reasons that people doubt the existence of God is because of this question. Right? They question, why is there still suffering in the world? If God is so big and so good, why do people still suffer? Is he not all powerful? Can he not take care of it? Or is he not all good and he's just letting it happen? How do we answer that? Right? This is one of the biggest reasons why people doubt the existence of God. And even Christians sometimes doubt God when trials come. Right? How many of you have doubted God at some point in your Christian walk? It's healthy. I want to encourage you. Doubt is healthy. It actually helps build your faith and strengthen you. It's healthy to go through a time of doubt. I've gone through plenty of doubt. Most doubtful person ever. Doubtful Thomas. No. It helps strengthen your faith when it challenges your perspective on who God is and challenges you to rethink about how God works. It's healthy to doubt God at some point. But why does suffering exist? Why does it happen? Does the Bible give us any answers? Right? We trust the Bible and we expect the Bible to actually have some answers. And surprisingly, and this is why this is either helpful or disappointing to you, the Bible actually gives us 5 reasons why suffering happens. At least 5 that I could find. There could be more. At least 5 reasons why there's suffering in the world. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So 5 reasons. The first reason, and the biggest reason, everything else will fall under this one, is that we live in a fallen world that's contaminated by sin. Right? That's the biblical reason for every piece of suffering that you face. That we live in a fallen world that's contaminated by sin. I want you to open to the first book of the Bible, Genesis 3. We're all familiar with this story. Adam and Eve are in the garden, got a choice whether to eat of this fruit or not. They choose to eat from the fruit, and then God curses everything because of it, because they wanted to take control of the world for themselves. Right? They didn't trust God enough to take care of it. They wanted to take control for themselves, autonomy from God. So in Genesis 3, 14 through 19, these are the curses that God lays on them because of their actions. God says to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you more than all cattle and more than every beast of the field. On your belly you will go, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. So that's a snake. Now to the woman, he said, I will greatly multiply your pain in childbirth. In pain you will bring forth children. and all the women groan because they hate Eve now. But it says, yet your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. That's another curse from the decision to eat from this fruit. And then to Adam, and this is the big one. This is where this comes into play. Because you've listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten from the tree about which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat from it, cursed is the ground because of you. Now, it's not even just Adam. Now the ground itself is cursed because of Adam, because he chose to eat. In toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall grow for you. And you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you will eat bread till you return to the ground, because from it you were taken. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. That part about the ground, why is the ground cursed? Because of Adam's sin. Why is creation cursed because of Adam's sin? It comes back to Genesis 1. God put mankind in charge of his creation. And so we are managing it for God. And what happens when you get a bad manager? Right now, some of you have had bad bosses throughout your life, right? If you get a bad boss, everything else falls away, right? Everything else is terrible if you have a bad boss. We are bad managers of God's creation, because we don't trust him to take care of it. We want to do it all ourselves, and we just fail all the time. That's why the creation is cursed, is because of us. Because of us. Romans 8 actually picks up on this as well. It gives a little hope to the situation. Romans 8, verses 18 through 22. He says, I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation itself was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself also will be set free from its slavery to corruption into the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now. See, God's not just coming back to restore us. He's going to restore the entire creation. Right? Animals, plants. Natural disasters won't happen anymore. Tornadoes, hurricanes, everything that has happened, all the suffering that brings, will finally be done away with. But it all started because of us. Because we're bad managers of God's creation. Because of mankind's decision to disobey our God, our entire world is cursed with hardship and suffering. Okay, that's the biblical reason for suffering. That's the big one. Everything else will fall under this one, but this is the big one. The entire creation is cursed because we disobey God. Sorry if you were looking for a happy-go-lucky sermon, but that's not going to be it. This is biblical. This is what happens. And there's hope. There's hope that it's all going to be made new again. But for now, this is why we suffer. Because of our disobedience, because of our sin, and because we don't trust God enough. So that's the first reason for suffering. We live in a fallen world that's plagued with sin, contaminated with our sin. The second reason for suffering has a little bit of a better vibe to it, so you might be able to smile a little bit. Suffering can be used by God to discipline us as his children when we wander away from him. I mean, how many of you have kids? How many of you discipline your kids? A lot of people that don't discipline their kids anymore, but how many of you discipline your kids, right? Do you do it because you hate them? Right? Do you discipline your kids because you hate them? No, you love them and you want them to do the right thing. And because you don't have to teach a kid to do wrong, right? You have to teach the kid to do right. So God disciplines us in the same way. I found this passage in Psalm 119. It's the longest psalm in the Bible. But this passage was very helpful. Verses 71 and 72. It says, it was good for me that I suffered. Oh, what? It's good for me that I suffered. So that I may learn your commandments. The law of your mouth is better to me than thousands of gold and silver pieces. It's good for me to suffer because I learn more about God through it. Because he's disciplining me. He's teaching me. Hebrews chapter 12 also picks up on this. It says this, "You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin. And you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons." Verse 11 says this, "All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness." God uses suffering to discipline us, to draw us closer to him, because we stray all the time. We don't think about God all the time like we should. But when you're in a moment of suffering, what's the first thing you think of? Even atheists call out to God when something bad happens, right? When somebody dies. Suffering is a powerful tool of discipline that God can use. And surprisingly, if we are children of God in Christ, if you've been baptized and you're part of the family of God, you have salvation and you're ready for it, you should actually expect some discipline and suffering. Right? Jesus didn't tell us that things get better when you follow him. It gets worse. It gets worse. You might even die for it, so come on, sign up. Right? It's going to get so much worse. You're going to get ridiculed. You're going to be hated by everybody, so come follow me. We should expect it to get much, much harder when we are Christians. We shouldn't expect to have everything in the world. We shouldn't expect it to go smoothly all the time. We should expect some discipline from our Father and expect persecution. So that's the second thing. God can use suffering as discipline. I mean, when you discipline your kids, right, they think it's the end of the world. Right? And so we do too. When God disciplines us, we think everything's falling apart. It's going to be okay because God's working in it. God's using it. The third reason that we have suffering, this is pretty practical here, is a result of the choices that we make. Pretty simple. That's a biblical thing. Suffering can be a result of your choices. Right? We don't make great choices all the time. How many of you made great decisions all the time? How many of you make bad decisions quite often? Yeah. Looking at the end of Deuteronomy, Moses is encouraging the Israelites before they are about to go into the promised land. In chapter 30, verse 19 and 20 says this, "I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. So choose life in order that you may live, you and your descendants, by loving Yahweh your God, by obeying his voice, by holding fast to him. For this is your life and the length of your days, that you may live in the land which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them." Choose life. You have choices in your life. Did you know that? You have choices. Right? God's not just directing everything for you. I had to come to that realization the other day, is that sometimes God gives you options, and he expects you to make the right choice. He stands back and lets you make the decision. He doesn't tell you what he wants you to do. He expects you to be close enough to him to know. Just like parents, when you train up your children, you expect them to go on their way and do the things you train them to do, but you're not going to do it for them. Same way with God. Heard this quote the other day: the teacher is always quietest when there's a test, right? Teacher doesn't give you the answers. He tests you. Wants you to make your decision, good or bad. So suffering can be a result of our choices. Because since human beings, all of us, are drawn towards sin, we don't always make the best decisions and can bring suffering on ourselves and others. we're very poor decision makers, right? We're very poor decision makers. So I want to encourage us. When something bad's happening, don't immediately start blaming God. Right? That's the wrong response. Why not look to see if you're responsible for it first? Take responsibility for your choices and actions. Don't just pawn it off on God. He's not responsible if it's your choice. That's what we do too much. We blame God for everything, when really, most of the time, it's our own fault and the choices that we made. So let's stop. Let's stop blaming Him. Take responsibility for our actions. And trust Him that He'll get us through it. So that's 3. We've got a fallen world that we live in. There's a reason for suffering. God can use it to discipline us. Suffering can be a result of our choices. 4th thing, suffering can be a result of satanic influence. This one's fun, right? So getting involved with Satan here. As Satan tries to draw us away from our Heavenly Father, he can use whatever he wants. He's the God of this age. He's the prince of the power of the air, as the Bible calls him. He has power. I want to read just a small story from Jesus' ministry in Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 9. Something that most of the time I've skipped over when you read through the Gospels, you kind of breeze through it and then move on, but this one has a powerful message for suffering. Verse 1, it says, they came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. When he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And he had his dwellings among the tombs. And no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains. And the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. And no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, day and night, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains, and gashing himself with stones. And then seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him. And shouted with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Whenever I hear that, I think of the movie Ghost Rider. Anyone watch Ghost Rider? Okay, I've only got one there. So. But this man's in terrible torture. I mean, he's literally cutting himself with stones and screaming out day and night. Nobody can help him out. And it's not the fault of the man. It's the fault of this unclean demon spirit. Right? It doesn't tell us the man did anything wrong. He just has a demon in it. And Jesus calls it out. We are in a spiritual battle. And because of that, Satan attacks us all the time. In 1 Peter chapter 5, Peter says this. First Peter chapter 5, verses 8 and 9, he says this. "Be of sober spirit, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brothers who are in the world." The devil wants you. Right? He knows he's not going to win in the end, so he's going to try to take you down with him. So sometimes suffering can be a result of spiritual forces at work. Now, I don't want you to think that Satan's responsible for every cough and sneeze that you have in the world, okay? There are people like that. I don't want you to be those people. But he is real, and he has power. And he can create difficult circumstances for people. So sometimes there are spiritual powers present. So that's another possibility of suffering as well. One that most of the time we don't think of. Because as you draw closer to God, the devil's going to attack harder. So we should expect more suffering the closer and closer we get to God. Someone once said this, if you haven't ran into Satan lately, maybe you are walking in the same direction as him. And that's very, very true. The closer you get to God, the more and more difficult it's going to be. And that's the way it works. Because Satan's out to get you. We can have confidence that we can overcome him, but it will be difficult. That's where some suffering does come into play. So that's number 4. And this final one, this is where it might be disappointing for you by the answer. Sometimes suffering is a result of nothing more than time and chance. Sometimes stuff just happens. Right? You're cutting down a tree and a limb falls and hits you in the head. Think Satan was involved in that? Or do you think God's trying to throw a branch at you? Or do you think it just fell? Right? Sometimes things just happen. Ecclesiastes chapter 9. I'll read verse 10 as well because it's a very important verse. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going. I again saw under the sun that the race is not always to the swift, and the battle is not always to the warriors. Neither is the bread always to the wise, or wealth to the discerning, or favor to the men of ability. For time and chance overtake them all. Moreover, man does not know his time, like fish caught in a treacherous net, and birds trapped in a snare. So the sons of men are ensnared at an evil time when it suddenly falls on them. Time and chance can overtake anybody. Time and chance can overtake anybody. Sometimes things just happen, and we need to be okay with that. We can't try to find a spiritual message behind every single bad thing that happens to us. Sometimes it just happens. This is biblical. This is a biblical statement from Ecclesiastes. This is where it's disappointing. You don't always get an answer to the suffering you face. I'm sorry. Sometimes you want an answer, and you don't get one. And that's okay. It's okay not to get an answer to everything. It's okay to not understand why you're going through what you're going through. Sometimes it just happens. Maybe you're not understanding what God's doing. That could be a possibility. But you don't always get an answer. So how can we deal with suffering? In light of these 5 biblical ways that suffering happens, how can we deal with it? Because suffering happens, and it's hard, it's difficult, and we don't like it. So how can we deal with it? Although we don't always get an answer, we can still trust God. Right? We don't have to understand everything that he's doing. We don't have to try to comprehend what he's thinking or what he's doing. We can trust him because he knows what he's doing even if we don't understand. Isaiah chapter 55. Verses 8 and 9 says this. My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, declares Yahweh. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God knows more than you do. Right? He might have a plan. He might not. But it's on him for suffering. We just need to trust him and trust that he'll get us through it. Even if we don't understand. Have you ever tried to read the book of Job? Go ahead and try to read the book of Job. I mean, it's a long book and very complicated in some ways. But at the end, so Job is this guy who lost everything. I mean, lost his house, lost his kids. The only thing he had left was a wife that was telling him to die. So, it's a story. And he's crying out to God, why is this happening? Right, this is the story. And guess what the answer is at the end? There is none. God doesn't tell him why. God just tells him to trust him. And that's how we need to be too when we suffer. I don't have to understand what's going on, but I will trust that you are God and you will get me through it. That should be our mentality. That should be the way we live. That's faith. That's trust. That's how we need to live. Like Job. So we need to trust God, even if we don't understand him. The second thing, there's actually much to learn through suffering. You can learn a lot by suffering. I mean, it's very easy to skate by in life. But when you suffer, you learn a lot. So I encourage you to embrace your suffering. Welcome it. Because it's going to happen anyway, right? So just embrace it. It's there. Let's use it. God could be using it to get your attention. So James 1 talks about. He says, consider it all joy when you face suffering and trials. All joy to suffering and have trials with. Because God could be using it. We should embrace our suffering. You can learn a lot by it. You can learn more about God. You can draw closer to Him. You can learn about who you are. What your faults are. There's a lot to learn in suffering. We live in a society that will try to avoid suffering at all costs. It shouldn't be the way amongst us. We need to embrace it and live with it. You can learn a lot by suffering. And then finally, some hope. Although this is a very sad message, right? There's some hope at the end. God has promised to remove all the suffering. He has. He will do it because He is all good and all powerful. He's going to do it when Jesus returns. Revelation chapter 21, verse 4, he says that He's going to wipe away every tear from their eyes. There'll no longer be any death. There's no longer any mourning or crying or pain. Everything, the first things have passed away. God's going to take care of the suffering, but in His time. For now, you and I need to hope and be patient for that time to come. He'll help you through it now, but He's finally going to get rid of all the suffering when Jesus returns. May that day come soon. It helps you look forward to that time even more. When you're suffering, you want nothing more than for God to remove it. So it helps you hope more in that coming kingdom when God does away with all the suffering. God will conquer all the suffering, but it's in His time and not ours. We don't know when Jesus is coming back. We hope it comes soon. But our job for now is to trust Him and be patient until that day does come. So some final thoughts. Suffering is a part of life, right? If you live, you suffer at some point. That's what. Try to read through Ecclesiastes one day. I read through that the other day. It is a very depressing book, because he's just talking about how life is meaningless, because it's just full of suffering. But then there's God again. Suffering is a part of life, and we need to deal with it. But it won't last forever. Right? Suffering will end. It will end. God has promised that. We just need to hope and be patient for it. God's going to remove it one day, just in His timing. We simply need to believe and trust in Him, even if we don't understand what He's doing. So that's my encouragement to you today. If you're suffering today, I don't know what you're suffering with, God will get you through it. It'll be tough, and that's part of life, but He'll get you through it. You just need to trust Him and listen. So I invite the worship team to come forward to close us out with one more song. Don't blame God for everything that goes wrong. Just embrace it and live with the suffering.